Picture this. A castle looms high in the Carpathian Mountains, its jagged stone walls piercing the sky, casting a shadow of dread over the villages below, where every creak of a door, every howl of the wind, sends shivers down the spine. It's the late 16th century in Hungary, a land gripped by chaos. Ottoman armies storm the borders, noble families wage their own wars for power, and the peasantry huddle in fear, their lives at the mercy of their lords. Into this dark world steps Elizabeth Báthory, a noble woman whose beauty hides a chilling secret, a name that will echo through history as the Blood Countess, a figure so terrifying she's become a legend of horror. Her story is a twisted maze of truth and myth, a tale of unimaginable cruelty, unchecked power, and a desperate fight for justice in a time when the elite could do whatever they wanted.
Did she really murder hundreds of girls, bathing in their blood to stay young forever? Or was she framed by enemies who wanted her family's power for themselves?
Grab a seat and hold on tight. We're diving into the shadows of history to uncover the truth about Elizabeth Báthory, a woman whose legacy still haunts us, a name that sends chills down the spine 4 centuries later. Born in 1560, Elizabeth Báthory was no ordinary child. She was a Báthory, part of a Hungarian noble dynasty so powerful they rivaled the king himself, their castles dotting a kingdom caught in a deadly tug-of-war between the Ottoman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. Her family's wealth was staggering, gold, land, and influence that made them untouchable. But their name carried a darker edge, whispers of occult rituals, madness in the bloodline, and a cruelty that seemed to seep through the generations. Elizabeth's life would become a storm of violence and terror. Her story centered on Cactus Castle, a fortress that turned into a house of horrors, where screams echoed through the night, and the legend of the Blood Countess was born. We're not just here to tell her story. We're here to unravel the mystery, to explore the world she lived in, the crime she's accused of, and the legacy that still draws thrill-seekers to the ruins of her castle today, searching for answers in the stones that witnessed it all.
So, are you ready to face the darkness?
Let's begin. Join the adventure. Subscribe now and unlock a world of exciting histories. Elizabeth Báthory's story begins on August 7th, 1560, in the small town of Nyírbátor, where she was born to a family that was both a golden ticket and a ticking time bomb. The Báthorys were Hungarian nobility at its peak. Think sprawling estates, glittering jewels, and a name that opened every door in the kingdom. Her father, George Báthory, was a hard man, a noble of the X-branch who ruled his lands with an iron fist, his loyalty to the crown matched only by his ruthlessness toward those who crossed him. Her mother, Anna, came from the Somlyo branch, a union that merged 2 powerful factions into a dynasty that could challenge the king himself. Elizabeth grew up in a world of luxury. Imagine grand halls lit by roaring fires, tables groaning under the weight of feasts with roasted boar, sweet wines, and exotic fruits, all served on silver platters, while minstrels played haunting melodies. But beneath the glamour, there was a darkness, a family name shadowed by rumors of occult practices, whispers of madness, and a cruelty that seemed to run in their blood, a legacy that would shape Elizabeth in ways no one could have predicted. Hungary in the 16th century was a land on the edge of a knife, a kingdom torn apart by war and betrayal, where survival meant playing a deadly game of power. The Ottoman Empire was a juggernaut, their armies sweeping through Europe, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The Battle of Mohacs in 1526 had been a catastrophe. King Louis II was killed, the Hungarian army was slaughtered, and the kingdom was split into 3 jagged pieces: Royal Hungary under Habsburg rule, Ottoman Hungary under Turkish control, and the Principality of Transylvania, a semi-independent region where the Báthorys held sway. This chaos turned Hungary into a battleground, with noble families like the Báthorys fighting to hold onto their power, their castles becoming fortresses in a land where the weak were crushed without mercy. For the villagers living in the shadow of these castles, life was a daily struggle. Taxes that left them starving, punishments for the smallest offenses, and the constant threat of war that could burn their homes to the ground at any moment. It was in this brutal world that Elizabeth's childhood unfolded, a world that taught her the value of power and the cost of weakness. As a child, Elizabeth was no stranger to the violence of her time, her early years marked by experiences that would leave a lasting scar on her soul. The Báthory household was a place of strict discipline, where disobedience was met with swift and brutal punishment. Some accounts claim she witnessed horrors as a young girl, servants whipped for spilling a drop of wine, or a peasant sewn into a horse's belly for trying to escape, his screams echoing through the estate as a warning to others. Whether these stories are true or not, they paint a picture of a childhood steeped in cruelty, a world where violence was as common as the morning mist. Elizabeth was also surrounded by whispers of the occult, her family's rumored dabbling in alchemy and witchcraft, practices that were both feared and revered in a time when the line between science and magic was razor-thin. Some say she suffered from seizures as a child, episodes that left her trembling and incoherent, a condition that might have been epilepsy, but was seen as a sign of madness or demonic possession in the 16th century, adding fuel to the rumors that the Báthory bloodline was cursed. At just 10 years old, Elizabeth's life took a dramatic turn when she was betrothed to Ferenc Nadasdy, a young nobleman from another powerful Hungarian family, a match that would set the stage for her future. The Nadasdys were warriors, their names synonymous with military might, and Ferenc, 5 years her senior, was already being groomed for the battlefield, a future Black Knight of Hungary, who would strike fear into the hearts of the Ottomans. This betrothal wasn't about love, it was a power play, a union designed to strengthen both families in a kingdom where alliances could mean the difference between survival and ruin. Elizabeth was sent to live with the Nadasdy family. Her childhood abruptly ended as she was thrust into the role of a future noble wife, learning to manage estates, command servants, and navigate the treacherous world of Hungarian politics. She was a child in a world of adults, her every move watched, her every mistake punished, her life no longer her own as she was molded into the perfect bride for a man she barely knew. The wedding came in 1575, when Elizabeth was just 15, a spectacle that shook the Hungarian nobility to its core, a celebration that showcased the wealth and power of both families in a kingdom on the brink of collapse. The Nadasdy estate in Sarver was transformed into a glittering stage. Hundreds of nobles arrived, their silks and velvets shimmering in the candlelight, their laughter mingling with the clink of goblets as feasts stretched on for days. Roasted swans, spiced meats, and rivers of wine flowed freely, while musicians played and dancers twirled, their movements a stark contrast to the tension in the air. Elizabeth stood at the center of it all, her beauty breathtaking in a gown of crimson silk, her dark hair cascading down her back, her expression a mask of composure that hid the storm brewing inside her. Ferenc, tall and imposing in his military finery, was by her side, but his eyes were already on the battlefield, his mind on the wars that would soon call him away. The marriage gave Elizabeth power. She became the Lady of Cactus Castle, a fortress in the Carpathian Mountains, but it also left her isolated, her husband often absent, her days filled with the weight of managing vast estates and a growing household, a solitude that would soon give rise to a darkness that no one could have foreseen. Ferenc's absence became a defining chapter in Elizabeth's life, a void that allowed her darker impulses to take root, her power unchecked as she ruled Cactus Castle with a grip of iron. The castle was a world unto itself, perched on a hill in what is now western Slovakia, its remote location surrounded by dense forests and rugged terrain, a perfect place to hide secrets. Elizabeth bore 5 children, Anna, Ursula, Catherine, Paul, and Andrew, but motherhood didn't soften her. If anything, it sharpened her edges, her temper flaring at the smallest slight. Servants began to whisper of her cruelty, maids beaten for a crooked stitch, a stable boy whipped for a horse that wasn't saddled fast enough, their fear growing with each passing day. The villagers below the castle started to notice something darker. Girls who went to work at the castle and never returned, their families left with nothing but rumors and dread. Elizabeth's early years had been a crucible, forging her into a woman of immense power and even greater darkness, a noble woman whose beauty masked a growing storm, a storm that would soon break over the region in a wave of terror that would change history forever. The whispers of terror began to spread like wildfire in the late 1580s, as Elizabeth Báthory's cruelty exploded into something far more sinister, a darkness that would stain the history of Hungary with blood. What started as harsh punishments for her servants, slaps for a spilled goblet, whippings for a poorly made bed, turned into acts of unimaginable horror that would make even the bravest souls tremble. Young girls, often daughters of peasants from the villages around Cactus Castle, began to vanish without a trace, their families left with nothing but fear and unanswered questions. These girls were lured to the castle with promises of work, jobs as maids, seamstresses, or kitchen hands, a chance to earn a few coins to help their struggling families. But once they stepped through the castle gates, they were never seen again, their fates sealed in the cold stone walls of a fortress that had become a slaughterhouse. The villagers huddled around their hearths at night, their voices low and trembling as they shared stories of screams echoing through the valley, of bodies found in the woods, mutilated beyond recognition, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. Fear gripped the region like a vice, a terror that had a name: Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess, a noble woman whose beauty masked a monstrous evil, a predator who hunted the most vulnerable among them. Her victims were the forgotten ones, young girls aged 10 to 14, chosen for their vulnerability, their poverty, and their lack of protection in a society that saw them as disposable. They came from villages like Verbov, Bekov, and Trnava, small communities where life was a daily grind of backbreaking labor, plowing fields, tending livestock, and praying for a harvest that would keep starvation at bay. These girls were the daughters of farmers, blacksmiths, and laborers, children who dreamed of a better life, who saw the castle as a glimmer of hope, a chance to escape the drudgery of their existence. Elizabeth and her accomplices preyed on that hope, sending emissaries to the villages with promises of work, of wages, of a future. The girls would leave their homes with a mix of excitement and fear, their parents watching them go with a knot of unease in their stomachs, a feeling they couldn't shake. Once inside the castle, the girls were at Elizabeth's mercy, their lives snuffed out in a nightmare of pain and despair. Some were tortured immediately, their screams swallowed by the castle's thick walls. Others were kept alive for weeks, subjected to a slow, agonizing descent into darkness before their inevitable deaths. Estimates of her victims vary wildly. Some say 80, others as many as 650, a staggering number that would make her one of history's most prolific killers, her name a synonym for death itself. The tortures she inflicted were the stuff of nightmares, a catalogue of cruelty that defies comprehension, each act more horrifying than the last, a testament to the depths of her depravity. Elizabeth took a sick pleasure in inflicting pain, her methods designed to maximize suffering, to draw out the agony, for as long as possible. She beat her victims with whips, clubs, and even her own hands, her rage a terrifying force that left the girls bruised and broken, their bodies a canvas of pain. She drove needles under their fingernails, the sharp metal piercing tender flesh, or sewed their lips shut with coarse thread, silencing their screams as they begged for mercy. She burned them with hot irons, branding their skin with symbols of her power, the smell of charred flesh filling the air as she watched with a twisted smile. In the depths of winter, she'd force the girls outside into the freezing night, dousing them with buckets of icy water, laughing as they shivered and froze to death, their bodies found the next morning, encased in ice, their faces locked in expressions of torment. Some girls were starved, locked in dark rooms with no food or water, their bodies wasting away as Elizabeth observed, her curiosity a perverse form of entertainment. Others were mutilated, fingers sliced off with a blade, faces slashed with knives, bodies torn apart by tools designed for destruction, their blood pooling on the cold stone floor. The castle's dungeon became a chamber of horrors, its walls stained with the blood of the innocent, its air thick with the stench of death, a place where Elizabeth's darkest impulses were unleashed, a place where humanity itself seemed to die. Her accomplices were her willing partners in this reign of terror, a group of loyal servants who enabled her atrocities, their hands as stained with blood as hers, their loyalty a mix of fear, coercion, and shared sadism. The most notorious were 4 women. Anna d'Arvulia, a mysterious figure who some say introduced Elizabeth to the occult, teaching her the dark arts that fueled her cruelty. Duracisentis, known as Dorco, a brutal enforcer who carried out the tortures with a savage glee. Ilona Jo, a longtime servant who had been with Elizabeth since her childhood, her loyalty unwavering even in the face of such horrors. And Catalin Benexki, a washerwoman who helped dispose of the bodies, her silence bought with fear. There was also a young man, Janos Ujeri, known as Fixco, a deformed boy who served as Elizabeth's errand runner, luring girls to the castle with false promises, his twisted smile the last thing many of them saw. These accomplices were not mere bystanders, they were active participants, abducting the girls, restraining them during the tortures, and disposing of the bodies, often burying them in shallow graves around the castle or dumping them in the nearby Var River, their actions ensuring that Elizabeth's crimes could continue unchecked for years. Their complicity made them as guilty as their mistress, their names forever linked to the terror that engulfed the region, a testament to the power Elizabeth held over those around her. The bloodbath myth is the most infamous part of Elizabeth's legend, a gruesome tale that has become the cornerstone of her story, a symbol of her vanity and her evil that has captivated the world for centuries. According to the myth, Elizabeth believed that bathing in the blood of virgins would preserve her youth and beauty, a belief that drove her to murder hundreds of girls, draining their blood into a tub and immersing herself in it, her pale skin glistening with the crimson liquid as she sought to defy the passage of time. It's a chilling image, one that has been seared into the collective imagination. But is it true? Historians are divided. Some argue it's a piece of propaganda, spread by her enemies to demonize her, to justify her downfall and the seizure of her family's lands. Others believe there's a kernel of truth, that Elizabeth's fascination with alchemy and the occult may have led her to experiment with blood, her obsession with youth and beauty driving her to unspeakable acts. Whether fact or fiction, the blood bath myth captures the essence of the terror she inspired, the sense of a noble woman so consumed by her own vanity that she would commit atrocities to cling to her fading beauty, a story that has become a cornerstone of her legacy, a symbol of the horror she inflicted on those who crossed her path. Her husband's death in 1604 was a turning point, a moment that unleashed the full extent of Elizabeth's darkness, her restraint, if she ever had any, vanishing like smoke in the wind. Ferenc Nadasdy, the Black Knight of Hungary, died after a long illness, his body weakened by years of war against the Ottomans, his wounds and exhaustion finally claiming him. His death left Elizabeth a widow at 44, a woman with immense wealth, power, and no one to answer to, a dangerous combination for someone with a growing darkness inside her. With Ferenc gone, there was no one to temper her behavior, no one to question her actions, no one to stop her as she descended deeper into the abyss. Some historians speculate that Ferenc's presence had kept her worst impulses in check, that his authority as her husband had prevented her from acting on her most violent desires, his military campaigns a distraction that kept her occupied. Others whisper that Ferenc was complicit, that he had taught her the methods of torture she later used, his own brutality on the battlefield a blueprint for her crimes, his death simply removing the last barrier between Elizabeth and her victims. Whatever the truth, Ferenc's death unleashed a wave of terror that swept through the region, as Elizabeth's crimes grew more frequent, more brazen, more horrifying, her castle becoming a house of horrors that no one could escape, a place where the screams of the innocent became a haunting symphony of despair. The villagers' terror grew with each disappearance, their fear turning to desperation as they realized that no one was coming to save them, that they were on their own against a noblewoman whose power seemed untouchable. The villages around Cactus Castle were small, their populations numbering in the dozens, their lives revolving around the rhythms of the land, planting in the spring, harvesting in the fall, surviving the harsh winters in between. They were serfs, bound to the land by law and tradition, their lives dictated by the demands of their lords, their taxes leaving them with barely enough to survive, their punishments for disobedience swift and severe. But Elizabeth's crimes took this fear to a new level, a terror that permeated every aspect of their lives, a terror that could not be ignored. Mothers kept their daughters hidden, locking them in cellars or sending them to distant relatives, their hearts breaking as they whispered prayers for their safety. Fathers stood guard at night, their pitchforks and scythes no match for the power of a noblewoman, but their determination a testament to their love for their children. The village elders began to meet in secret, their whispers of rebellion growing louder with each passing day, their fear giving way to a burning anger that could no longer be contained. They knew that speaking out against Elizabeth was dangerous, that her family's power could crush them without a second thought. But they also knew that they could not stand by as their daughters were stolen from them, their lives snuffed out by a woman who saw them as nothing more than playthings to be used and discarded. Her methods of disposal were as chilling as the murders themselves, a grim testament to the lengths Elizabeth went to cover her tracks, to erase her victims from existence, to ensure that their stories would never be told. Bodies were a problem, too many to hide easily, too many to explain away, their presence a constant threat to her secrecy. Elizabeth and her accomplices devised gruesome ways to dispose of their victims, each method more horrifying than the last, a reflection of the cold calculation that underpinned her cruelty. Some girls were buried in shallow graves in the castle's courtyard, their bodies hastily covered with dirt, their resting places unmarked, their names forgotten by all but their grieving families. Others were thrown into the nearby Var River, their lifeless forms carried away by the current, washing up miles downstream, where they were found by horrified villagers, their bloated and broken bodies a grim reminder of the terror that stalked the region. In the dead of winter, when the ground was too hard to dig, Elizabeth ordered her servants to burn the bodies, the flames consuming flesh and bone, the smoke rising into the sky like a dark omen, its acrid smell lingering in the air for days. There were even tales of bodies being fed to the castle's dogs, the animals trained to devour human remains, their growls a haunting soundtrack to the horrors unfolding within the castle walls, their hunger a reflection of the insatiable appetite of their mistress. These methods were not just practical, they were a statement, a way for Elizabeth to assert her dominance, to erase her victims from existence, to ensure that their voices would never be heard. But the sheer number of deaths made secrecy impossible, and the villagers' suspicions grew with each disappearance, their fear turning to anger as they realized that the Blood Countess would not stop until she was forced to. Elizabeth's psychological state during this period is a subject of endless fascination, a puzzle that historians and psychologists have been trying to solve for centuries, a window into the mind of a woman who became a symbol of evil.
What drove her to such depravity, to commit acts so horrific that they defy comprehension?
Some believe she suffered from a personality disorder, perhaps narcissistic personality disorder or psychopathy. Her lack of empathy, her need for control, and her sadistic tendencies, all pointing to a mind that was fundamentally broken. Others point to the trauma of her childhood, the violence and instability of her time, the rumors of mental illness in her family as possible factors in her descent into cruelty. There are accounts of Elizabeth experiencing seizures, which some believe were a sign of epilepsy, a condition that was poorly understood in the 16th century and often associated with madness or demonic possession, its symptoms adding to the perception that she was cursed. These seizures may have contributed to her erratic behavior, her fits of rage, her descent into paranoia as her crimes escalated, her mind a battleground of conflicting impulses, vanity and self-loathing, power and fear, beauty and brutality. Some speculate that her obsession with youth and beauty was a reflection of her own insecurities, a noble woman who saw her fading looks as a threat to her power, her murders a twisted attempt to reclaim what time was stealing from her. Whatever the cause, Elizabeth's psychological state was a complex mix of factors, a storm of nature and nurture that turned her into the monster of legend, a woman whose actions raised profound questions about the nature of evil, the impact of power, and the thin line between sanity and madness. The whispers finally reached the ears of those in power by 1610, as the villagers' cries for justice grew too loud to ignore, their anguish a force that could no longer be silenced. For years, the local authorities had turned a blind eye, too afraid of the Báthory family's influence or too corrupt to act, their silence bought with gold or secured through threats. But the sheer scale of the disappearances, hundreds of girls gone, their families left with nothing but grief, became impossible to dismiss, a stain on the kingdom that demanded action. King Matthias, too, pressured by the growing unrest and the whispers reaching his court in Vienna, ordered an investigation, appointing Georgi Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, to lead the charge. Thurzo was a man of ambition, loyal to the crown but also eager to make a name for himself, and he saw in Elizabeth's case a chance to prove his worth. On December 30th, 1610, he arrived at Cactus Castle with a small army of men, their torches casting flickering shadows on the snow-covered ground, their breath visible in the freezing air as they prepared to confront the Blood Countess. What they found inside was beyond their worst nightmares, bodies of girls, some still alive but barely clinging to life, their eyes hollow with terror, others dead, their remains scattered around the castle, a gruesome testament to Elizabeth's reign of terror, a scene that would haunt Thurzo and his men for the rest of their lives. The investigation uncovered horrors that shocked even the most hardened officials, a catalogue of atrocities that laid bare the true extent of Elizabeth's crimes, a darkness that had festered in the shadows for far too long. Thurzo and his men searched the castle from top to bottom, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls, their torches illuminating scenes of unimaginable horror. They found diaries in Elizabeth's handwriting, meticulously kept records that listed the names of her victims, hundreds of them, a chilling tally of death that confirmed the villagers' worst fears. Survivors, trembling and scarred, were discovered in the dungeon, their bodies bearing the marks of their torment, burns, cuts, and bruises that told a story of unrelenting cruelty. These girls, barely alive, spoke in broken whispers of the tortures they'd endured, their voices shaking as they described the needles driven under their nails, the hot irons pressed against their skin, the freezing nights when they were left to die in the snow. The castle's dungeon revealed its secrets: blood-stained walls, rusted chains hanging from the ceiling, and a collection of torture devices that made even the bravest men recoil in horror. Whips, knives, branding irons, and a contraption some called an Iron Maiden, a spike cage that may have been used to drain the blood of her victims. Elizabeth's accomplices were arrested on the spot, their confessions spilling out under pressure, each one more horrifying than the last, their words painting a picture of a noblewoman who had lost all trace of humanity, her castle a slaughterhouse where innocents went to die, a place where the screams of the innocent had become a haunting symphony of despair. The trial that followed was a spectacle that gripped the entire kingdom, a public reckoning that drew crowds from far and wide, a moment of justice that the villagers had waited years to see. Elizabeth, as a noblewoman, was never formally tried. Her status protected her from the gallows, a bitter reminder of the inequalities of the time, but her accomplices faced the full wrath of the law, their crimes laid bare for all to see. In January 1611, the trial began in the town of Bitka, a small courtroom packed to the brim with villagers and nobles alike, their faces a mix of anger, fear, and anticipation as they waited to hear the gruesome details. Duraci Sentis, Ilona Joe, and Janos Ujeri stood before the judges, their hands bound, their eyes darting nervously as the testimonies unfolded, each word a nail in their coffin. Survivors took the stand, their voices trembling as they recounted the horrors they'd endured, their scars a visible testament to the cruelty they'd suffered. The accomplices' confessions were read aloud, their words chilling the room, tales of abductions, tortures, and murders that left the crowd gasping in horror, their anger boiling over as they realized the true extent of the nightmare that had unfolded in their midst. The judges wasted no time. Duracia and Ilona were sentenced to have their fingers torn off with hot pincers before being burned alive, their screams echoing through the town square as the flames consumed them, a brutal end to their reign of terror. Janos was beheaded, his body burned alongside the others, his death a swift but grim justice. Katalin Benecki, who had shown some mercy to the victims, was spared execution but sentenced to life in prison, her fate a small mercy in a trial that offered little comfort to the grieving families. For the villagers, the trial was a moment of vindication, a chance to see their tormentors punished, but it left a bitter taste. Elizabeth herself remained untouchable, her noble blood a shield against the justice they so desperately craved. Elizabeth's punishment was a different kind of justice, a compromise that reflected the complexities of her status, a sentence that left the villagers both relieved and enraged. Instead of execution, she was sentenced to life imprisonment in her own castle, a decision that sparked outrage among the peasantry, who had hoped to see her burn alongside her accomplices. In 1611, Elizabeth was walled up in a set of rooms in Cactus Castle, her windows bricked over, her door sealed except for a small slot for food, her world reduced to a dark, cold prison where the ghosts of her victims were her only company. She was left to live out her days in isolation, a prisoner in the very place where she had committed her crimes, her beauty fading, her mind unraveling, her once powerful presence reduced to a shadow of its former self. For 3 years, she lingered in that dark confinement, her health deteriorating, her spirit broken, until she died on August 21st, 1614, at the age of 54, her body found slumped on the cold stone floor, her death as lonely as her final years. Some say she was haunted by the screams of the girls she killed, their voices echoing in her mind as she faced her own mortality, while others believe she felt no remorse, her heart as cold in death as it had been in life. Her punishment was a compromise, a way to appease the villagers without upsetting the delicate balance of noble privilege. But for many, it was not enough, a hollow victory in a fight for justice that had cost so much. The trial raised questions that echoed far beyond the walls of the courtroom, questions about justice, power, and the deep inequalities that defined the world of 16th century Hungary, questions that would resonate for centuries to come.
How could a woman of Elizabeth's stature commit such atrocities for so long without consequence, her crimes hidden behind the walls of her castle, her noble status a shield against the law?
The trial exposed the corruption of the legal system, the complicity of those who had ignored the villagers' pleas for years, their silence bought with gold or secured through fear. It highlighted the deep divide between the nobility and the peasantry, a divide that allowed the elite to act with impunity, their actions unchecked by a system that was designed to protect them, not their victims. For the villagers, the trial was a moment of vindication, a rare instance where their voices were heard, where the powerful were held to account, but it also underscored the limits of justice in their world, the reality that Elizabeth's noble blood had spared her the worst of the punishment, a stark reminder of the inequalities that defined their lives. The trial of Elizabeth Báthory became a landmark in Hungarian history, a moment when the veil of noble privilege was torn away, revealing the darkness beneath, a moment that would be remembered as a turning point in the fight for justice, a fight that would continue long after the Blood Countess was gone. Elizabeth Báthory's legacy has grown far beyond the walls of Cactus Castle, her story evolving over the centuries into a legend that continues to captivate and terrify, a tale that has taken on a life of its own. In the years after her death, she became a cautionary tale in Hungary, a warning to the nobility about the dangers of unchecked power, her name whispered in the halls of castles as a reminder of what could happen when privilege turned to cruelty. By the 18th and 19th centuries, her story had been reshaped into a Gothic horror tale, her name synonymous with vampirism and the supernatural, a figure who captured the imagination of a Europe obsessed with the macabre. Writers like Bram Stoker drew on Eastern European legends of blood and terror, and some believe Elizabeth's story influenced the creation of Dracula, her bloodbath myth a precursor to the vampire lore that would dominate Gothic literature. The image of the Blood Countess, soaking in a tub of blood to preserve her youth, became a staple of horror, a symbol of female monstrosity that fascinated the Victorian era, blending fear with the strange allure in a society that was both repelled and drawn to the idea of a woman so powerful, so evil, that she would defy nature itself to cling to her beauty. In the 20th century, Elizabeth's story took on new dimensions as filmmakers, authors, and historians reimagined her as both villain and victim, her legacy a battleground for competing narratives that reflect the changing values of the modern world. Horror films like Countess Dracula in 1971 and The Countess in 2009 brought her story to the screen, each one offering a different take on the Blood Countess, some portraying her as a sadistic monster, others as a misunderstood woman caught in a web of political intrigue, her crimes exaggerated by enemies who sought to destroy her. Books and documentaries have explored her life in depth, some focusing on the historical evidence, others delving into the psychological and cultural factors that shaped her legend. their interpretations as varied as the scholars who study her. Feminist readings have emerged, arguing that Elizabeth was a victim of her time, a powerful woman demonized by a patriarchal society that feared her independence, her story twisted to fit the narrative of the monstrous feminine, a trope used to control women who stepped outside their prescribed roles. Others see her as a symbol of the dangers of absolute power, a noble woman whose privilege allowed her to act without consequence. Her crimes a reflection of the inequalities that defined her world, a world where the peasantry had no voice, no power, no hope against the might of the elite. Today, Elizabeth Báthory remains a figure of fascination, her story a magnet for those who are drawn to the dark corners of history, a name that continues to inspire both horror and curiosity in a world that can't seem to look away. The ruins of Cactus Castle have become a tourist attraction, their crumbling walls a pilgrimage site for thrill-seekers and history buffs alike, their stones whispering the secrets of the past to those who dare to listen. Visitors walk the grounds where Elizabeth once walked, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls, their imaginations running wild with the stories of the Blood Countess, her crimes as vivid in their minds as they were 400 years ago. Her story has been retold in countless forms, novels, movies, video games, even heavy metal songs, each one adding a new layer to her legend, each one grappling with the question of who she really was.
Was she a monster, a woman who killed for pleasure, her heart as cold as the Carpathian winters, or was she a scapegoat, her crimes exaggerated by a society that needed a villain to justify its own failures?
The truth may never be known, but one thing is certain. Elizabeth Báthory's legacy is a mirror, reflecting our own fears, our own fascination with the dark side of human nature, a reminder of the thin line between power and corruption, between beauty and horror, between history and myth. Her story also raises deeper questions about the nature of historical narratives, about how we remember the past, and about the stories we choose to tell, questions that challenge us to look beyond the legend and seek the truth. The accounts of Elizabeth's crimes come largely from the trial records, testimonies given under duress, confessions extracted through torture, and stories spread by her enemies, all of which raise doubts about their reliability. Some historians argue that her victim count was inflated, that the number of 650 girls was a fabrication meant to justify her punishment, while others believe the true number may be closer to 80, still a horrifying toll, but far less than the legend suggests. The bloodbath myth, too, is likely a later addition, a piece of propaganda that emerged in the 18th century, long after her death, a story that fit the Gothic fascination with blood and beauty, but may have little basis in fact. These uncertainties remind us that history is often written by the victors, by those with the power to shape the narrative, and that the truth about Elizabeth Báthory may be far more complex than the legend suggests, a truth that lies buried in the shadows of Cactus Castle, waiting for those brave enough to uncover it. Elizabeth Báthory's story is a journey into the darkest corners of history, a tale that forces us to confront the worst of human nature, the dangers of unchecked power, and the enduring power of fear. She was a noble woman born into privilege, a woman whose beauty and status gave her the world, but whose darkness turned that world into a nightmare for those around her. Her crimes, whether 80 or 650, left a scar on the region, a wound that has never fully healed, a reminder of the cost of silence, the cost of a system that allowed the powerful to prey on the weak with impunity. Her legacy is a complex one, a mix of fact and myth that continues to captivate us, to challenge us, to make us question what we know about the past and what we believe about the nature of evil. Was she a monster, a woman who killed for pleasure, her heart as cold as the Carpathian winters, or was she a victim of her time, A scapegoat whose story was twisted by those who sought to destroy her? The truth may never be known, but her name will live on, a whisper in the shadows, a chill in the air, a reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all. As we leave Cactus Castle, its ruins standing silent in the Carpathian Mountains, we're left with more questions than answers. A story that refuses to be neatly resolved, a legacy that continues to haunt us. Elizabeth Báthory's life is a mirror, reflecting our own fears, our own fascination with the macabre, our own struggle to understand the line between history and myth. Her story reminds us of the power of narrative, the way history can be shaped by those who tell it, and the importance of seeking the truth, even when it's buried in the shadows of the past.
So the next time you hear a creak in the night, or feel a chill down your spine, remember the Blood Countess, and ask yourself, what is the true cost of power, and what secrets lie hidden in the stones of history?
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the mysteries of the past.